Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we get into tonight's match, I wanted to talk about this video's sponsor, Marvel Strike Force. It's a perfect way to spend a little time when you're waiting for your next CEDH pod to fire. It's a free-to-play, turn-based RPG featuring nearly 200 of your favorite Marvel characters. It's super easy to pick up and play, and I liked being able to do something while waiting for the Gitrog player to demonstrate their loot. As a CEDH player, what really drew me into the game was the depth of play offered. There are synergies between different characters like Avengers, Spider-Verse, or the X-Men. Just as each player at your local playgroup has their own style, characters in the game have different types too. You can play with brawlers, controllers, blasters, and protectors, all with different roles on your team and approaches to battle. Just as we like to upgrade our own CEDH decks with the latest tech, there are awesome ways to level up your characters in the game. Features like promotions, gear, and training all make your characters better. Just as there are a million different formats in Magic, so you'll never get bored, there are a ton of ways to leverage your teams. This includes story campaigns, blitz campaigns where you take on other players' teams, and raids that let you team up with other players to tackle a bunch of challenges. It's free to download and free to play, and it is super fun. I've recently assembled my full Avengers team for my Heroes campaign, and now I'm working on my Sinister Six team for my Villains campaign as well. Check out Marvel Strike Force for free by checking out our link in the description below. We are back with some of our Mox Pro patrons for tonight's game. They brought their favorite decks and we will see how they perform tonight. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Mike piloting Winota, Joiner of Forces. This deck seeks to resolve its commander, attack repeatedly, and put more and more stacks creatures onto the battlefield. Mike's opening hand contains a Path to Exile, Esper Sentinel, Skyclave Apparition, Grand Abolisher, Plateau, Eiganjo Seed of the Empire, and his London Mulligan is a Gemstone Caverns. Next, we have Noah piloting the partner pair of Krark the Thumbless and Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. This deck seeks to land both of its commanders, sling multiple spells, and win with a massive storm count. Noah's opening hand contains the Gemstone Caverns, Training Center, Archmage Emeritus, Rite of Flame, Ponder, and his London Mulligans are Cascade Bluffs and a City of Brass. After that, we have Sean piloting the partner pair of Thrasios Triton Hero and Bruce Tarl Boorish Herder. This deck looks to land advantage engines and get to the mid game and win with one of its many layered combos. Sean's opening hand contains a Windswept Heath, Mox Diamond, Llanowar Elves, Boseiju Who Endures, Delay, Enlightened Tutor, and a Flusterstorm. Finally, we have Greg piloting the partner pair of Thrasios Triton Hero and Vile Smasher the Fierce. This deck also looks to land advantage engines, but instead seeks to control the table in order to make it to the late game before going for the win. Greg's opening hand contains a Mindbreak Trap, Underground Sea, Jataxian Probe, Mox Amber, Sig River Cutthroat, Deathrite Shaman, and a Morphic Pool. Without further ado, let's begin this laughable, languishing, loud, laudable lecture. Mike wins the NyQuil flavor blind taste test and gets to start us off. But Noah has a pre-game action and puts Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Ponder. Mike draws a card for turn and plays a Plateau. He casts Esper Sentinel. He casts a Phyrexian Walker. Mike passes. Sean draws a card for turn and plays a Windswept Heath. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He casts Mox Diamond, discarding Boseiju Who Endures. Esper Sentinel triggers and Mike draws. Sean casts his commander, Thrasios Triton Hero. Sean passes. Noah draws and plays a Training Center. He casts his commander, Krark the Thumbless. Noah ends his turn. Greg draws and plays a Morphic Pool. He casts Deathrite Shaman. He pays 2 life to cast Jataxian Probe, targeting Mike. Esper triggers and Mike draws. Greg looks at Mike's hand and draws a card. He casts a Mox Amber and gives the turn to Mike. Mike draws and plays a Eiganjo, Seed of the Empire. He casts Grand Abolisher. Mike ships the turn to Sean. Sean draws and casts Llanowar Elves. He passes. Noah draws and starts off his turn by casting Rite of Flame. Krark and Esper trigger. Mike draws a card, then Krark resolves. Noah wins the flip, copying Rite of Flame. Then Noah adds 4 red. He casts his other commander, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. It enters as a copy of Krark. All through, Noah ends his turn. Greg draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts Sig, River Cutthroat. Greg gives the turn to Mike. Mike draws and plays a Mountain. He casts Goblin Crater Maker. Mike passes. Sean draws and casts a Mystic Remora. Esper triggers and Sean pays. Remora resolves and Sean ends his turn. Noah draws, takes no actions, and passes. At the end of Noah's turn, Greg activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling Rite of Flame, with each opponent losing 2. Greg draws and plays an Underground Sea. He casts his commander, Vile Smasher the Fierce. Greg passes. Mike draws, looks at Remora, and passes the turn. During his upkeep, Sean pays for his Mystic Remora. He draws, does nothing else, and passes. Noah draws and casts a Talisman of Creativity. Esper and Remora trigger and both draw. Noah ends his turn. At the end of Noah's turn, Greg activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling Jataxian Probe, with each opponent losing 2. Greg draws and plays an Exotic Orchard. He casts Keen Sense, targeting his Vile Smasher. Vile Smasher, Esper, and Remora all trigger. Sean draws, Greg pays for Esper, then rolls for Vile Smasher, dealing 1 to Sean. With Keen Sense still on the stack, Sean casts Chain of Vapor, targeting Vile Smasher. Esper triggers and Sean pays. In response, Greg casts Spell Pierce, targeting Chain. Remora triggers and Sean draws. Spell Pierce counters Chain of Vapor and Keen Sense resolves. Greg moves to combat and attacks Noah with Vile Smasher. Noah takes it and Keen Sense triggers. Greg draws a card and then passes the turn to Mike. At the end of Greg's turn, Mike flashes in an Aven Mind Sensor. Mike draws and plays a Plains. He casts Chrome Mox. Remora triggers and Sean draws. Chrome Mox resolves and Mike imprints Skyclave Apparition. He casts his commander, Winota, Joiner of Forces. He casts Gingerbrute. He moves to combat and attacks Greg with Mind Sensor, Phyrexian Walker, and Gingerbrute, and Noah with Goblin Cratermaker. Winota triggers 4 times. Mike looks at the top 6 and fails to find. He looks at the next 6 and then puts Ethersworn Canonist onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking Greg. He looks at the next 6 and then puts Blade Historian onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking Greg as well. He then looks at his final 6 and puts Recruiter of the Guard onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking Greg. Recruiter triggers and Mike fetches up a Solitude into his hand. Greg blocks Gingerbrute with Sig, and then he and Noah take the rest. All through, Mike passes. At the end of Mike's turn, Sig triggers and Greg draws. During his upkeep, Sean pays for his Remora. He draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts Wild Growth on his Command Tower. Esper triggers and Mike draws. All finished up, Sean passes, discarding to hand size. Noah draws and plays an Otawara, Soaring City. He casts Archmage Emeritus. Noah attempts to move through phases, and in his second main phase, Greg activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling Forbidden Orchard, adding a red. He casts Flame Sweep. Vile Smasher, Esper, and Remora trigger. In response, Mike evokes Solitude, exiling a white card. It enters, exiles Vile Smasher, and Greg puts it into the command zone. Then Solitude is sacrificed. Then Sean and Mike draw a card, Greg rolls for Vile Smasher, and deals 3 to Noah. Then Flame Sweep resolves, dealing 2 to each creature. Mike then sighs as Noah passes the turn. At the end of Noah's turn, Sig triggers and Greg draws. Greg draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. In response, Sean casts Delay, countering and exiling Rashmi with 3 time counters on it. Next, Greg casts Mystic Remora. Sean's Remora triggers and he draws. Greg's Remora resolves and he passes the turn to Mike. Mike draws and plays a Blinkmoth Nexus. He casts Sanctum Prelate. It enters and Mike names 2. He casts a Drannith Magistrate. He moves to combat and attacks Greg with Winota and Blade Historian and Noah with Phyrexian Walker. Winota triggers, Mike looks at the top 6 and fails to find. Then Greg takes it and Mike passes the turn. During his upkeep, Sean pays for his Remora. He draws and plays a Savannah. He casts Devoted Druid. Sean gives the turn to Noah. Noah draws and casts Frantic Search. Both Remoras trigger and Greg and Sean draw. Frantic Search resolves, Noah draws 2, discards 2, and untaps 3 lands. Noah casts Dockside Extortionist. It enters and Noah creates 7 treasures. Locked out by Drannith Magistrate, Noah passes to Greg. During his upkeep, Greg pays for his Remora. Also in his upkeep, he removes the time counter from Rashmi. He draws and plays a Watery Grave into play tapped. Greg passes. Mike draws and casts Shatterskull Smashing, where X equals 3, targeting Devoted Druid and Sig, River Cutthroat. Both Remoras trigger and they both draw. Then Shatterskull resolves. Mike attempts to move to combat, and in response, Greg channels Otawara, Soaring City, bouncing Blade Historian to Mike's hand. Then Mike attacks Greg with Winota, Phyrexian Walker, Sanctum Prelate, and Drannith Magistrate. Winota triggers, Mike looks at the top 6, putting Brutal Cathar onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking Greg. Brutal Cathar triggers, exiling Sean's Thrasios, with Sean choosing to put it into the command zone. Then Greg takes the damage, and Mike passes to Sean. During his upkeep, Sean pays to keep his Remora. He draws, holds open mana, and passes the turn, discarding to hand size. During Noah's upkeep, day becomes night, and Brutal Cathar transforms into Moonrage Brute. Noah draws, takes no actions, and passes the turn. During his upkeep, Greg pays for his Mystic Remora. Also in his upkeep, he removes the time counter from Rashmi. He draws and plays a Mana Confluence. Greg ends his turn. Mike draws and activates Blinkmoth, turning it into a creature. He moves to combat and attacks Greg with Winota, and Sean with Blinkmoth, Phyrexian Walker, Moonrage Brute, Sanctum Prelate, and Drannith Magistrate. Winota triggers 3 times. Mike looks at the top 6 and puts Combat Celebrant onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking Sean. He looks at the next 6 and fails to find. He then looks at the next 6 and puts Magus of the Moon onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking Sean as well. Both declare no blocks, take it all, and Greg dies. In his second main phase, Mike casts Imperial Recruiter. It enters, and Mike fetches up an Alseid of Life's Bounty into his hand. He casts Alseid of Life's Bounty. Finished up, Mike ends his turn. At the end of Mike's turn, Sean casts Force of Vigor, exiling a green card, targeting Alseid and Blinkmoth Nexus. In response, Mike exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand, adding a red. He activates Alseid, sacrificing it, and giving Blinkmoth protection from green until end of turn. Force of Vigor fizzles, and Sean moves to his turn. During Sean's upkeep, night becomes day and Moonrage Brute transforms back into Brutal Cathar. It triggers and exiles Dockside Extortionist. Also during his upkeep, Sean lets his Remora die. He draws, takes no actions, and passes the turn. During Noah's upkeep, day becomes night and Brutal Cathar transforms into Moonrage Brute. Noah draws, sees the writing on the wall, and passes the turn. Mike draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He casts Blade Historian. He moves to combat and attacks Sean with Magus, Winota, Combat Celebrant, and Imperial Recruiter, and attacks Noah with Phyrexian Walker, Moonrage Brute, Drannith, and Prelate. When Mike attacks with Combat Celebrant, he exerts it, untapping his other creatures and gaining an extra combat step. Winota triggers twice, and knowing they are inevitably dead, Noah and Sean concede, and Mike wins the game. What a cool game. The guys played another, so let's dive in. In this game, Sean brings back Thrasios Triton Hero and Bruse Taro Boorish Herder. His opening hand contains a Wooded Foothills, Forbidden Orchard, Breeding Pool, Sylvan Library, Cyclonic Rift, Elvish Mystic, and his London Mulligan is an Emergent Zone. Noah brings back Krark the Thumbless and Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. His opening hand contains a Command Tower, Scalding Tarn, Overmaster, Gitaxian Probe, and his 3 London Mulligans are a Fierce Guardianship, Bloodstained Mire, and a Grape Shot. Greg brings back Thrasios Triton Hero and Vile Smasher the Fierce. His opening hand contains an Underground River, Misty Rainforest, Vampiric Tutor, Mana Vault, Opposition Agent, Bloom Tender, and a Mana Crypt. Mike brings back Winota, Joiner of Forces. His opening hand contains a Command Tower, Bloodstained Mire, Drannith Magistrate, Magus of the Moon, Jeweled Lotus, Blade Historian, and his London Mulligan is Athalia's Lancers. And Sean gets to start us off. Sean draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Savannah onto the battlefield. He casts an Elvish Mystic and passes the turn. Noah draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He passes. Greg draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He casts out Mana Crypt. He cracks his Misty Rainforest, pays a life, and fetches up a Bayou onto the battlefield. He casts a Bloom Tender and gives the turn to Mike. Mike draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Plateau onto the battlefield. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He cracks his Lotus to help cast his commander, Winota, Joiner of Forces. Mike ends his turn. Sean draws and plays a Breeding Pool into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts a Sylvan Library. He passes. At the end of Sean's turn, Noah cracks his Scalding Tarn, pays a life, and fetches up a Steam Vents into play tapped. Noah draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts Desperate Ritual, adding 3 red. He casts his commander, Krark the Thumbless. Noah casts Overmaster. Krark triggers, Noah wins the flip, copying Overmaster. Both resolve, and Noah draws 2 cards. Finished up, Noah passes. During his upkeep, Greg loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays an Underground River. He taps his Underground River to help cast his commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. Greg passes. Mike draws and plays a Command Tower. He moves to combat and attacks Greg with Winota. Greg takes it, and in his second main phase, Mike casts Drannith Magistrate. Mike ends his turn. During his draw step, Sean draws 2 extra from Sylvan Library, paying 8 life to keep them both. He plays a Forbidden Orchard for turn. He casts a Spellseeker. It enters, and Sean fetches up a March of Swirling Mists into his hand. The table suddenly worries, and Sean passes the turn. Noah draws and casts Gamble. Krark triggers, Noah loses the flip, bouncing Gamble back to his hand. He plays an island for turn. He pays 2 life to cast Gitaxian Probe, targeting Sean. Krark triggers, Noah wins the flip, copying Probe, targeting Greg. He looks at Greg and Sean's hand and then draws 2 cards. Next, Noah casts Strike It Rich. Krark triggers, Noah loses the flip, bouncing it back to his hand. All finished up, Noah passes. At the end of Noah's turn, Greg activates Thrasios, scrying 1, and revealing a Waterlogged Grove into play tapped. During his upkeep, Greg loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. Also in his upkeep, he casts Vampiric Tutor. In response, Noah casts Submerge for its alternate cost, targeting Bloom Tender. Krark triggers, Noah wins the flip, copying Submerge, targeting Thrasios. It resolves, and Greg moves Thrasios to the command zone. Then the original resolves, and Greg puts Bloom Tender onto the top of his library. Then Vampiric Tutor resolves, and Greg says goodbye to Bloom Tender as he fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Greg draws and casts a Mana Vault. He taps his Waterlogged Grove and his Underground River to help cast Consecrated Sphinx. In response, Sean, not wanting to let that nonsense on the board, casts Mindbreak Trap for its alternate cost, exiling Consecrated Sphinx. Dismayed his spicy creature didn't land, Greg passes to Mike. Mike draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Sacred Foundry onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. He moves to combat and attacks Sean with Drannith and Winota. Sean takes it, and in his second main phase, Mike casts Sanctum Prelate. It enters, and Mike names 1. Everyone else sighs, and Mike ends his turn. During his draw step, Sean draws 2 extra through Sylvan Library, paying 8 life to keep them both. He casts Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. He taps Forbidden Orchard, giving Noah a spirit to cast Dockside Extortionist. It enters, and Sean creates 2 treasures. He pays 2 life to help cast Phyrexian Metamorph. It enters as a copy of Dockside. It triggers, and Sean creates 2 more treasures. He casts Emil the Blessed. Everyone suddenly stands to attention, and Sean passes to Noah. Noah draws, stares at Sanctum Prelate, and passes the turn. During his upkeep, Greg loses his mana crypt roll and takes 3 damage. During his draw step, he takes a damage from his mana vault. Greg casts Toxic Deluge, paying 4 life. In response, Sean casts March of Swirling Mists, where X equals 3, exiling a blue card, phasing out his own Emil, Kennen, and Dockside. Then Deluge resolves, and all creatures get -4/-4, wiping the board. All finished up, Greg passes. Mike draws, takes no actions, and passes. At the end of Mike's turn, Noah casts Brainstorm. He draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. Before Sean's turn, his creatures phase in. During his draw step, he draws 2 extra from Sylvan Library, paying 4 life to keep 1 extra. He plays an Emergence Zone. He activates Emil, targeting his Dockside. In response, Noah casts Stifle, targeting the activated ability of Emil. In response, Sean taps his Forbidden Orchard, giving Noah a Spirit, and casts Red Elemental Blast, targeting Stifle. In response, hoping to find an answer, Greg sacrifices his Waterlogged Grove, drawing a card. He does not find it, and the stack resolves. Red Blast counters Stifle, and Emil flickers Dockside. Dockside enters, and Sean creates 2 treasures. Since Kennen is on the battlefield, all of Sean's treasures add 2 mana, so he presents a loop of activating Emil, flickering Dockside, and generating more and more mana. He recasts his commander, Thrasios. He activates Thrasios, drawing his deck and putting all lands onto the battlefield tapped. He casts all of the creatures in his deck. He casts Finale of Devastation, where X equals 69,420, pumping his creatures and giving them haste. He moves to combat, attacks with the team, and Sean wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a fun set of games tonight. Congrats to Mike and Sean on their wins. In Game 1, Mike was able to snowball effectively, putting his opponents on the back rope for the majority of the game. The table admitted defeat and gave it to Mike. In Game 2, Sean's decision to fetch up March of Swirling Mists was the perfect choice. He could use it offensively to get rid of Drannith, or defensively as he ended up doing against the Toxic Deluge. In the end, it spelled victory for him this evening. A big thanks again to all of our Mox Pearls for all of their support. We would love to have you on an episode as well. If spots are open, sign up to our Mox Pearl tier and record a game with us today. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.